Good morning. If I could have your attention, please. Again. My name is Alex Wright. I'm the Executive Director of the 390th Memorial Museum, and I would like to welcome all of you here this morning to a very special event that we're going to have to honor this gentleman here, true national treasure. Before we get started, though, I'd like to recognize all of the members of the DFC Society who came today. I'd like to recognize the members of the Friday Pilots. I'd especially like to recognize retired Brigadier General Jim McDivitt, a Korean War hero, fighter pilot, and Gemini and Apollo astronaut. And I'd like to welcome all of our visitors. Thank you all so much for coming. You folks upstairs have the best seat in the house, believe me. A couple of months ago, John Mollis and I were having a conversation, as two history geeks normally do when they talk to each other, about how do we preserve history. History is divided into single stories that make up the whole book. I came up with the idea that we would have John, I commissioned him to do a specific artwork to commemorate a specific mission that Dick Bushong flew in World War II. What you're going to see here in a little bit is a product of a great amount of effort on John's part, not so much on mine, but it commemorates Dick's last combat mission in a B-17 flown against Nazi Germany on April 13, 1944. That's a special event, and we want to preserve that day in history. From today forward, what you're going to see here in a little while will be preserved in history forever and ever. That having been said, I'd like to introduce Mr. Woody Gilliland of the Flying Cross Society, who has a special presentation for Richard.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you to the 390th Memorial Museum for hosting this event today. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here today representing the membership of the Distinguished Flying Cross Society. The Distinguished Flying Cross Society is committed to honoring and preserving the legacy of all Distinguished Flying Cross recipients. Our mission is to tell the story of those recipients, their courage, their patriotism, their character, to tell it to the general public and the youth of America. Dick Bushong represents a unique decade of Americans. Folks that were willingly setting aside their future and all they could accomplish to preserve the freedoms that we all enjoy today. And for that, we are eternally grateful and can never thank him and his generation enough. So Dick, if you would, could you join me?
Oh, boy.
So Dick, on behalf of the more than 3,000 members of the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, it's our honor and privilege to present you with this framed duplicate of your Distinguished Flying Cross medal with a commemorative plaque that reads, Colonel Richard B. Bushong, you brought them home. April 15th, 1944, 568th Bomb Squadron of the 390th Bomb Group, Framlingham, Suffolk, United Kingdom, European Theater of Operations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Boy, that is pretty. So the cross was pinned onto me right after April 13th when I got home with that wreck that I made it back to England in. But, so I got the flying cross back there in England.
Thank you for your
Thank you,
service.
thank you.
We'll put this in the box over here for you, so
Thank
you don't
you.
have to keep up with it.
All right, thanks so much.
Well, Alex told you a little bit about our next speaker, but I'd like to introduce renowned aviation artist John Mollison.
My name is John Mollison. I'm an aviation artist. I'm a writer. I'm part of the production team of Old Guys and Their Airplanes, and I'm going to be very brief. I've got 3 things to share with you. And the first thing that comes from is from our production director, Rick Lingberg. And Rick has a quote. He says, you know, John, many people need to see to believe, but there are a few that only need to believe to see. And I think about everybody in the room here, and we're a cross-section of military veterans and history geeks, but we're all united by this idea that somehow, some way, by learning and knowing our history and valuing the diverse stories of the people who make it, we can have a better future. And with that, I'd like to share with you the second thing. And Alex, need a little help here. Creating an piece of artwork, I have to tell you, the artwork is not the story here. The human is the story. But I'd like to share with you the second thing is the title of this print. And it's called A Greater Mission Remains. And it's why we're all here, because we believe that somehow, some way, we all profit from these stories and from the courage and the character of the people that make up great moments in history. The Distinguished Flying Cross Society is a fantastic group. Every one of these people has had their moment and had their vision and insight into stuff that affects the rest of our lives. The third thing I'd like you to pay attention to is the story that's behind this particular airplane. And with that, sir, would you come up and tell us about your last combat mission?
Oops. I'm getting old. You might have guessed that.
Why don't you have him sit in the chair?
Do you want to sit in the chair?
No, that's fine. I can stand up there.
You can.
Well, this is a beautiful painting. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I told him he should have put a few holes in it because I had a hell of a lot of holes.
Well, before we get to you telling your story, where would you put the holes?
All over. There was that thing was a wreck when I got home. But let me tell you about that mission.
Yeah.
Let me hold on to this thing. It'd be a little easier for me. The target that day was a Messerschmitt factory at Augsburg, Germany. And on a normal mission day, here's what happened. About 3 or 3:30 in the morning, someone would grab your toe and say, get up, you're flying today. Because not every crew flew that day. So they grabbed my toe about 3 o'clock in the morning. And from there we cleaned up, had to shave even though I just had fuzz then. But the oxygen mask had to fit tightly. So then we went to breakfast, and after breakfast we went to briefing. And that's when we found out where we were going and what we were going to bomb. So that day we got there and they said, okay, here's your target. They had a picture of the factory that we were going to bomb. It covered a lot of area. The airplane factory was pretty big, and they had runways, taxi strips, parking areas, all that kind of stuff. So we got there to briefing, and they showed us the route we were going to fly to get down to Augsburg and the route back. They designed these routes to avoid major areas of flak. Now we had flak all over the place, but flak was the German anti-aircraft. Flak is an acronym of three nice German words. Flüger, Abwehr, Kanonen, which means cannons that shoot at airplanes. So we took the FL and the A and the K and made the word flak. So everywhere we went in Europe, we were getting shot at, but they avoided major flak installations, which were around targets, and so that we would get there without too many holes in the airplane. So we got to Augsburg, 21 in our standard formation, and you can observe that here in this diorama. There are only 18 left at this point, but they started with 21. And so we got there, all 21 of us were still flying when we got to the target area. When we got there, there was a place called the IP, excuse me, the initial point, and we had to get to that and then made a turn toward the target, and now we're on the bomb run. And for us, it was a long time. It was about 5 minutes, straight and level, our whole formation flying along in heavy flak. All targets were heavily defended. So we were taking hits, everybody was taking hits as we were on the bomb run. We got to the target and all 21 of us dropped at the same time. We all dropped when the lead airplane dropped, so everybody was watching that lead airplane. And so all 21 of us dropped on the target, and we lost 3 of our 21 right there. 3 went down right over the target. So we turned away from the target to head back toward England. There were 18 of us left in the formation. So we're headed back toward England, 18 of us still in formation. All of us had taken damage over the target area. My little ball turret gunner, the guy in that little ball down under the airplane, he's the only guy that could see the bottom of the airplane. So he called in, "We got oil running off the wing behind number 1. Number 1 is the engine far out on that side. So I said, "Well, how fast is it running?" He said, "Well, it's a steady stream, but it's not a gusher." I said, "Okay." I kept that engine running and I stayed in formation. As we proceeded back toward England, we had a designated route. There was a towering storm ahead of us, a big cloud going up higher than our formation. You cannot take a formation into a cloud or you begin banging into each other and losing airplane. So we diverted around it. That took us right over a German airfield. Not a good place to be. Their flak was extremely accurate and a lot of it. So here the 18 of us already damaged, now we're taking some big hits. Every burst that they put up was right in our formation, or it felt like it. Boy, we were all taking hits. And so when we left that, when we got out of that intense flak, my little ball turret gunner underneath called in, "We got a gusher on number 2 and number 3 engines. Oil running back off the wing in great quantity." So I knew I'd been hit in an oil line or the oil tank or the oil cooler, something major. A lot of oil running back. So I got the top turret gunner out of the top turret. He was our flight engineer. And I said, "You stand right here." There was room between the pilot and co-pilot's seat that he could hang on the back of our seat and he could see all the gauges. And I said, "You watch those oil pressures. We have 3 engines leaking oil." And it's kind of like your automobile. We had no quantity gauge for the oil tank. We had a pressure gauge, but no quantity gauge. So I didn't know how much was left in number 1. I knew we were losing it fast out of number 2 and number 3. So I said, "You stand right there. If you see any oil pressure dropping, hit the feather button." Feather button was a round red button, about that big around, and it was the color of this shirt. There were 4 of them on the instrument panel, 1 for each engine. If he hit that button, it was a switch that started to pump in the bottom of the engine oil tank and pumped oil at high pressure out to the prop dome. That's this shiny part here in the front. And made the prop blades go to what we call the feathered position. So I could shut that engine down, excuse me, and when I shut the engine down, that prop would sit still, very little drag. So about 5 minutes after we left that airfield, an arm came over my shoulder and hit number 2 feather button. Number 2 is the second one in from the left. And it feathered, the prop feathered, and I shut that engine down, and now that prop is sitting nice and quietly. What I neglected to tell you was the manifold on number 2 engine is where we got a little warm air for our defroster in the cockpit. 2 things happened the instant I shut that down. The windshield frosted over and it got extremely cold in the cockpit because that little warm air did help warm the cockpit. So now we're frosted up. I can't see the fly formation, so I got out of formation. And now we're a single airplane crippled in enemy territory. Luckily, we did not have any fighters around. That's the kind they like to pick on, the crippled single airplane. So luckily, we didn't have any at that time. About 4 more minutes, arm over my shoulder and hit the feather button on number 3. And it was too late. We had lost too much engine oil. There was not enough left to feather the prop. So now the engine is turning over because the prop was going around. The pistons were going in and out without oil. It didn't take very long. Just a few minutes, that engine was red hot and stopped. But the prop was going with such force that it tore the reduction gears loose, or tore them all apart. They're right behind the prop in that nose section. Tore them all to pieces, and the prop was no longer connected to the engine. I shut the engine down, all the fuel was turned off, everything else was turned off for that engine, but the prop is out here spinning. And what was making it spin was my forward motion, like a whirligig. It was a lot of drag to me. I had to push that thing through the air, so it was kind of like a small barn door on this side of the airplane. So here we are in enemy territory. Number 1 is leaking but still running. Number 2 is feathered and shut down. Number 3, the engine's shut down, but the prop's out here spinning. And number 4 was a good engine. I was glad to have one that was like that. But we're still in enemy territory. I headed straight for home, gradually descending. Fortunately, we had a lot of good air below us. That's good air. Up above you isn't. We were about 22,000 when all of this happened, descending to keep my airspeed up and headed straight for home. I got there within sight of our airfield, and I was pretty slow getting there. Guys that had a lot of engines beat me there. So a lot of them were already there circling to get in. It was when you got home, if you had wounded on board, you shot a red flare. If you had mechanical difficulties, you shot a green flare. I got within sight of our airfield and I saw all these airplanes circling, and it looked like they were having a Christmas celebration. Red flares and green flares flying out of every airplane. I knew it wasn't Christmas because it was April the 13th. So I finally got there, and I had to make one complete circle of the airfield before I got on the final approach. Now, my airplane wasn't in too great a shape. I got on the final approach and I carried an extra 10 miles an hour. Our airspeed was in miles an hour. Later, it was in knots. So those days, it was miles per hour. I carried an extra 10 miles an hour down the final approach to the airfield. we were landing on our longest runway, which was 6,300 feet. That's pretty skimpy. Today, runway feet, well, so I carried an extra 10 miles an hour because I didn't want to settle out short of the field, and I didn't have enough power to pick it up if it started to settle on me. So I deliberately did that extra 10 miles an hour. So therefore, I hit the runway a little farther down than normal and going a little bit faster than normal. And I hit the brakes, and there weren't any. No brakes. Now I'm cruising, I had about a mile left, and I was going 85 miles an hour, and that eats it up pretty fast. Off the end of that runway and across the taxi strip and down a little bit of a slope was the boneyard for our base. That's where they took the wrecks to salvage parts off of them. Well, I was in a wreck, but I didn't want to go there while I was still in it. And I knew I was going to go there if I didn't do something. So about 600 or 700 feet from the end of the runway, I put full power on number one, made the airplane turn sharply to the right. It's called a ground loop. I made it turn sharply to the right and then stopped the turn with this one, and then both of them pulled me clear of the runway because there were airplanes behind me. Thank God for English mud. If it had been this kind of ground that we have outside here, I would still be rolling. But this ground is so hard. That good old gooey English mud grabbed that airplane, and those main tires are pretty good size. They were buried about that deep in the mud with a big pile of mud ahead of each one of them. And when I pulled off all the power, that thing went, ugh. It just stopped in that mud. The 10 of us got out, and we crawled out of the airplane. One guy was wounded, but we had him all patched up. It was just an injury in his jaw. He got hit by flak. And so the 10 of us were standing out in front here looking at this wreck that had brought us home and just being thankful that we had made it back to England, that we weren't in Germany somewhere. Now the crew chiefs were always watching when the group came back to see if their airplane was one of the ones that made it back that day. And that day, 3 of ours did not. So the crew chief for this airplane, Belle O the Brawl, he was watching, and he saw his airplane land covered with oil and full of holes, and one engine feathered and the other one flopping around out here. And he knew there was something wrong with it. Then he saw me put it in the mud. He got on his bike and he rode as far as he could and then slogged out through the mud to where we were. And he stood there looking at that airplane. Now he had an entirely different thought pattern than we did. We were just thankful for being back in England. He had to fix it. He looked at it and he turned to me and he said, "Gee, Lieutenant, what did you do to my airplane?" And I said, "No, wait a minute, that part's straight. I didn't do any of that. The Germans did that." Well, here's the history on that airplane, Belle O the Brawl. 25 days later, he'd had it all fixed up. New engines hung, patches on the holes, everything was fixed, and it flew a mission and was shot down. And 8 were killed and 2 were taken prisoner. That was the next mission on that airplane. Talk about being lucky. I was so lucky it was unbelievable. I flew 7 different B-17s on combat missions. All of them were destroyed after I flew them. One of them made it back to the States before it was chopped up. The others were destroyed over there. The one that made it back was named Johnny Walker. And when I learned that, I became a incurable Scotch drinker. Anybody have any questions that I could answer for you? Yes, sir.
You like tequila too?
Pardon?
You like tequila?
Oh, not as well as Scotch. But there are some good places down where I live, Green Valley, that make a real good margarita. Yes, sir. Yeah, I flew F-4s in Vietnam. Well, there were a lot of years in between. You have to think of that. I flew 43 different types of airplanes while I was in the Air Force. When I finished this tour, I got to go to test pilot school, so therefore I got to fly a lot of airplanes. So I flew helicopters at 0 speed, and I got to Mach 2.1 in that F-4, so I have a pretty good range of speed, 0 to 2.1. Yes, sir. Any other question? Yes, sir.
Is this why you have your wife drive so you don't lose your car?
Oh no, she's not my wife. We're engaged. Yeah, this is my younger girlfriend. I talk about that every Thursday. I work here every Thursday as a docent, and every Thursday people say, "Well, how old are you?" And I say 98 years old, and they say, "Well, what keeps?" I said, "I have a younger girlfriend." That's her right there, that good-looking lady.
I think we have a question from the balcony.
Somebody up there have a question?
Young man, right?
Oh, yes.
Your last mission that you flew, how long did it take you from start to finish?
How long did it take me from start to finish? My first mission was the 30th of December, 1943. And my last mission was April 13th of 1944, so 4 months.
Were you always flying into Germany?
Oh, yeah, the whole thing was Germany then. Oh, flight time? My average was around 7 hours. My longest mission was 11 hours and 20 minutes. And I can tell you that's a long time in an airplane like that. 11 hours and 20 minutes. We didn't have any airborne gas stations in those days, so we had to start with enough fuel to get back home. So, yes, ma'am. I beg pardon? Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah. When I finally retired, my retirement order said total military service 32 years and 8 days. I want to tell you, the last 8 days were pretty easy. The first 32 years had some lumps in them.
We'll take one more.
Yes, sir.
Was the April 13th mission the scariest mission you flew on?
It was because I didn't think we were going to make it home. With that engine leaking oil, if it went, we had to get out. You can't fly the thing on one outboard engine. And so I had the crew all ready to go. And I thought, oh my goodness, I flew all these missions and now they're going to put me in Germany on the last one. And I was afraid of that. So, but it was pretty scary. But I got hit every mission. I never got home without a hole. Yes, sir.
How old were you on that April 13th day?
21. I didn't. But I could fly the airplane without looking outside. We were qualified to fly instruments, so we could fly without looking outside. As I descended, it thawed, and so when we got back to England, I could see out. But that was scary when it went like that and everything froze up inside.
much, Dick.
Yes, ma'am. Now, probably close to 6,000 total, but I was a maintenance officer a lot of those years, so I didn't fly every day like some people. But I flew 5,500 in the Air Force and flew for a civilian company for a little while. That wasn't fun, though. I couldn't roll the airplane or anything.
Thank you all very much. We have to. One other admin thing. I'm asking everybody that was here today to take this pencil and try and make it semi-orderly and come up and sign the poster for future reference, okay? Do it in an orderly fashion like you were in 4th grade. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
I'm hearing the feed, yeah. I gotta get some new headphones, so every headphone I've got's got, that's the bedroom
Here you go,
paint.
sir.
Weigh in on the reasoning behind Judge Peter Cahill's 22-and-a-half-year sentence of Derek Chauvin.
He looked at the average of cases, and the average of cases told him that it was somewhere between 20 years and 25 years was appropriate. He decided that he would split the difference and come up with 22 and a half years. It was a highly appropriate sentence under the law.
CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. 4 people are dead and 1 is in critical condition after a hot air balloon crosses power lines in New Mexico. Lieutenant Tom Ruiz is with Albuquerque Fire and Rescue.
It was approximately 80 to 100 feet that it had crashed on the power lines. It's unclear as to why or how it had initially hit the power lines.
The FAA said the gondola fell about 100 feet and crashed into a busy street, catching fire. This is CBS News.
This hour's newscast is presented by Rocket Mortgage. Want to see your loan options, adjust payments and closing costs online in real time? Rocket can.
If the pandemic's taught us anything, it's that the easiest way for germs to get into your body is the nose. We all know how to wash our hands, but how do you clean your nose? For over 2 million Americans, the answer is Navage Nasal Care. Navage uses powered suction to flush out allergens, mucus, and germs that cause congestion, colds, and flu, so you can breathe better, sleep deeper, snore less, and feel healthier. Better yet, Navage is all natural and drug-free. That's why one of America's top respiratory hospitals recommends nasal irrigation to stay healthy, explaining that bacteria and viruses thrive in warm and moist environments, and that you can wash away those germs so they don't make your nose their home. Experience Navage at zero risk. Go to Navage.com, buy Navage, and use it for a month. If you're not delighted, return it for a full refund. There's nothing to lose and a lifetime of better breathing to gain. Also available at Target, Walgreens, CVS, Bed Bath, and Rite Aid. Navage, Navagee.
American Warrior Radio is paid for by Ronin Business Services. The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of KVOI or its sponsors. We all owe them, but very few of us know them. They took an oath to protect us at home and abroad, so the rest of us can live safe and free. They are the men and women of our military and first responder communities, and these are their stories. American Warrior Radio is on the air.
Recommend you pay a visit to the Memorial Museum. It's really a museum within a museum. It's focused on telling the deeply personal stories of the members of the 390th Bomb Group. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of history, and I'm a big fan in the power of storytelling. So what we're going to do today is I brought on a special guest who is also a very powerful storyteller, and we're going to interview a young man who you might have heard on American Warrior Radio before, Colonel Dick Bushong. There was just an amazing presentation took place here at the 390th Memorial Museum. So without further ado, let me introduce you to John Mullinson. John, you are, earlier today the phrase history geek was used on several occasions. Like me though, you never served. So why do you do this?
Well, we have a saying at my little production company, and I've been very fortunate. I've been in business, and I've seen the power of what happens when employees understand the legacy and the meaning of the people who've gone before them. So this is it's a calling for me, I guess you could call it that.
Now, you grew up in North Dakota, and I could tell you that you're an adventurous sort of soul, because when it came time for you to go somewhere, you went all the way south to South Dakota?
Yeah, South Dakota, where the winters are a little warmer, 120 miles. But yeah, it was much warmer winters. It went from minus 40 below to minus 20.
I spent a winter in South Dakota, so I hear you, brother. What you do, and if folks, I encourage you, if you're listening to our show live, or if you hear it in one of our other affiliates around the country a little bit later, 90th.org, they're going to put up a video of today's ceremonies and this interview. You'll get to see Colonel Bushong, and you also get to see just this tremendous artwork that John does. He draws these amazing photographs of these aircraft, and what makes them special is it's not just a drawing, a piece of artwork about the machine. It's about the person or persons and their stories behind that machine. In this case, it was Colonel Bushong's last mission, the 28th mission he flew to Berlin, and just barely made it home. So, John, real quick before we get to the Colonel, how many of these paintings are there, or not paintings, artwork are there around the world?
Hey,
oh, geez.
You've been here before.
They tell me in at least 14 countries. I'd say thousands. I've been very fortunate. I'm a prolific artist, and there are history geeks in at least 14 countries in the world.
And what do you, mostly all vintage of aircraft, right? Have you got a Sopwith Camel in there somewhere, or maybe not?
I meet the pilot, like Colonel Bushong here. I meet the pilot, and they sign the prints of my artwork, and they're the people who truly make it valuable.
Okay, well,
good segue here.
Yeah, I think we should talk to the man. And Colonel, I got to tell you, I've been out here so many times. You've been on American Warrior Radio. I've been out here so many times for events with you that I think you need maybe an agent. I think the Hollywood folks are going to come knocking on the door any minute, Colonel.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, Colonel, you're a pro, and as much as I'm a control freak, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'll let you know when we need to take a break, and all yours, sir.
Well, good. Colonel Bushong, I have an elevator speech, and it's something that if you ever meet me in the elevator, they ask me what I do. I say I interview old guys and I draw their airplanes. But you are so not an old guy. Where did you get your attitude for youth and vigor?
Well, it's my younger girlfriend. I'm 98 years old, but I have a younger girlfriend. She's 93.
Look, I got to ask you, when did you meet her?
Oh, about 14 years ago.
Okay.
And we live in the same complex down in Green Valley. And So I was introduced to her by some friends, and we've been friends ever since. So we go a lot of places together, and we used to go to reunions together and those kind of things all over the nation, but traveling is too hard for me now.
Right. How many people in the 390th, your bomb group, are still with us?
Not very many. At the last reunion last October, I saw 3 other veterans.
Really?
And one of them was 103 years old, so I don't know if he's still living or not. But I'm just a kid. I'm only 98.
Well, I've got a question that I ask everybody, every old guy. All right, so here it is. If you could go back in time and meet yourself when you're 21 years old and you're flying this gorgeous B-17 that's right behind you, for the people who need visuals, the inboard starboard engine is just right above Colonel Bushong here. It's really cool. But if you were to go back in time to yourself at 21, what kind of life advice?
I would say you're very lucky, but work hard, and I did. When I came back to the States, I went through test pilot school, and then I was assigned the Boeing factory in Wichita where they were making B-29. So I was an Army Air Force test pilot on B-29. And then later in my career, they said, oh, you've been to test pilot school, you know all of us. So I was an aircraft maintenance officer for years and worked my way up to deputy commander for logistics. And
who taught you? Who gave you those kind of values of hard work? And what does that mean to work hard?
My dad was a hard worker, and my mom too. He would work all day at the paper mill where he worked, and then come home and do 4 or 5 more hours of work around our place. Always busy. And of course, he got me busy. I worked hard too when I was a kid. So I enjoyed working, and it paid off. I worked hard.
Do you have grandkids?
Yes, I do. I just have 3 grandkids and 4 great-grandkids.
Okay, here's another question to ask you. Have you given them any advice about how to be successful in life? And if you have, what would you tell them, or what did you tell them?
Whatever you do, work hard at it. Do it right and work hard. I get chastised by my younger girlfriend because I want things to be right all the time. And they're not always, people do things wrong.
Say you're a perfectionist?
I am.
Yeah. But you seem positive. It's not like the negative kind of perfectionism.
No, I'm positive. Yeah, and I enjoy what I'm doing. I've worked here at the museum for 29 years.
Right.
Every Thursday that I could.
Right.
I had to take a few off when I got both knees replaced. And
you had both knees replaced?
At the same time. Could I photograph it? And I said, yeah, if you give me a copy. So I have a copy of it.
So you were a guinea pig?
Sort of, yeah. Now here I am, 98 years old, and I'm fairly good condition, doing fine.
Oh, you're looking great. What we're going to do pretty soon here is we're going to commercial break, and then I've got a very, very serious question to ask of you, and you're just in a great mood. So I want you to think we're going to have a 4-minute break here.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, thereabouts. Okay, so I'll ask the question though, because I want to talk to you about it. So all the listeners, you want to stand by. We've got a powerful moment coming up, I hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned into American Warrior Radio. You're hearing the voice of John Mollison. Look up Old Guys and Their Airplanes.com. Just some amazing videos there and interviews. And we're talking with Colonel Richard Bushong. They're honoring him here at the 390th Memorial Museum. There's John, there must be more distinguished flying crosses in this room than maybe a DFC reunion.
Oh yeah, if they were wearing them and they went swimming, they'd sink to the bottom.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. More with John Mollison and Colonel Richard Bushong. Stick around.
Yep. All right.
Hello. I'm Alex Wright, the Executive Director of the 390th Memorial Museum in Tucson, Arizona. We are a small, private aviation museum located on the grounds of the Pima Air and Space Museum. Our museum has a special focus that makes us unique. We tell the story of the combat experience of the 390th Bomb Group in World War II. The 390th Bomb Group was one of 40 heavy bomb groups located in East Anglia, England, in World War II. The group was located at Parham Field near Framlingham, East Anglia, England. The 390th was part of the 13th Combat Wing, which was made up of the 95th Bomb Group, the 100th Bomb Group, and the 390th Bomb Group. The 390th Bomb Group flew the B-17 Flying Fortress heavy bomber. During World War II, the group suffered heavy losses on its 301 combat missions flown between August the 12th, 1943, and April the 20th, 1945. During that time, on those 301 combat missions, the group lost 176 B-17s to combat, resulting in a staggering 700-plus aircrew members killed and 700-plus aircrew members taken prisoner of war. To help us tell this amazing tale of the 390th Bomb Group, we have the best possible exhibit, a B-17G Flying Fortress on static display. Our airplane was built by the Lockheed Vega Company in Burbank, California, and came off the assembly line in July 1945. It last flew in 1980 and is owned by the U.S. Air Force. The Air Force lends the airplane to the 390th Memorial Museum for static display. In addition to the B-17, the 390th Memorial Museum has numerous other exhibits that we will be highlighting in the near future, such as a POW exhibit, a nose art exhibit, a half-size Nissen hut exhibit, an aircrew photo exhibit containing over 350 aircrew photos, and many more exhibits that tell the story of the 390th Bomb Group. The museum is currently closed to the public for the duration of the national health crisis, but we anticipate reopening soon. Be sure to check back on social media for more videos about the 390th Memorial Museum. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Rome and modern.
American Warrior Radio, ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Ben Bueller Garcia. I got to tell you, folks, we're broadcasting from the 390th Memorial Museum, and for a guy like me, this is like being at a Hollywood premiere and a baseball all-star game and the Academy Awards all at once. Just what a tremendous opportunity here to meet some great people, some great patriots who have protected our country, and we're telling stories. We're telling stories, in this case in particular, about a young man, 98-year-old young man, Colonel Richard Bushong. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross after bringing his plane and his crew safely home from a mission over Berlin. Plane pretty well shot up. Dick, you were flying on one engine, 1.5 engines?
Well, I had
wing and a prayer?
two running.
2 running engines. And we're very pleased to have a true professional interviewing Colonel Bushong today, John Mollison, who is the John, founder, executive director, what is your title of Old Guys and Their Planes?
Head cook and bottle washer.
Head cook and bottle washer is good.
No, I'm part of a team.
An army travels on its stomach, so that's important. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can find out more Old Guys and Their Airplanes.com. Also, John is a very talented artist, and he has done, there's 30 prints that he's done, or he did one drawing of Colonel Bushong's airplane, and they're autographed by both you and the Colonel, and they're being sold as a fundraiser for the 390th. Folks can go online, find that if there's any left after today. But folks, you want to go to 390th.org to check that out. John, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, this is like a movie premiere. I have to ask you, Colonel, is when you see all this attention, they're all showing up for you, and what do you think about that?
Oh, I enjoyed it. They had a big celebration here at the museum for my birthday. That surprised me.
Yeah.
I thought it would be a cake. No, they had chairs out here and DIVs all over the place, and they had a representative from the governor, 3 mayors, and they all gave me proclamations. And oh my goodness,
Yeah.
It was quite an event.
You gotta wonder. Do you believe in luck?
Boy, do I ever, because to survive 28 missions over there was pure luck.
Really?
Yes. There might have been a little skill involved in flying formation. I got very good at that, but luck. My crew was shot down on their first mission. My crew that I trained with and went over with. I was in the hospital with some bad food, so I like bad food today.
You bring up skill, but surely, I mean, how much training did you get to fly one of these B-17s?
I went through pilot school, of course, and then I was a qualified pilot, but we had about 2.5 months training in the B-17 before we went overseas.
Right.
I was co-pilot at first because I was 20 years old, and the pilot was an old guy. He was 26, real old. And so after I became 21, I got checked out as first pilot and got my own crew.
Okay, I mean, I've got so many questions. I could spend the day with you, but there's a gentleman here in the audience, and he brought his dad's combat diary, and it's all written in that wonderful fountain pen, perfect penmanship that nobody has anymore. And what he was writing about was his psychological profile. Now, here's a question. Do you think that bomber pilots were culled or trained or selected differently than, say, like fighter pilots or recce pilots?
There was one part of us that made us go to bigger airplanes, and that was our height. I was 6 feet tall. When I got to basic flight training in pilot school, that was the middle flying course, they had us get in a line and it tapered. If the guy ahead of you was taller than you stopped. But if he was shorter, you stepped forward till the guy ahead of you was taller. So the line tapered like this, and they broke it into 4 squadrons. These little guys all went to fighter pilots. They all became fighter pilots. We bigger guys went to the big airplanes. So they knew that was going to happen. So they sent us, taller guys, to twin-engine advance rather than single-engine advance.
What do you think of that? I mean,
when we left basic, we went straight into twin-engine airplanes with side-by-side pilot and co-pilot. So we were training then to fly a bigger airplane with a co-pilot and a pilot.
Would you have rather flown fighters?
No, I asked for B-17s because I thought they were such a pretty airplane, but I didn't know they were going to be shooting at me within a couple of months. So.
Okay, so you're the commander of this office.
Yeah, eventually I became the commander. 10 guys on board, 10 crew members.
So what was your responsibility to those 10? Oh, those other 9. I mean, did you feel like you were their father, or was it just you just took whoever you got and you did your job?
No, we were pretty close crew. The crew itself was pretty close together, and we knew each other and knew what our jobs were. And I had my tail gunner got hit on one mission in the knee, tore a chunk of flesh out. And when we got back, they sent him to the hospital, sulfa drugs, sulfa powders, all they had. He came limping to me about 4 weeks later and said, I have been to the flight surgeon. Can I fly as your waist gunner because I can't get back there in the tail with this knee? Now that guy wanted to go, and he wanted to go with me. And I said, yes, you can.
John, and I think that's something, and I encourage folks, when you go, if you get a chance to see these aircraft, we're right in front of a B-17G now. You're here at the third largest aircraft museum in the world, I think. But perspective and the context is so important. You know, the colonel and 9 other crew members were on this aircraft. If you go look at the wingspan of an F-14 with what, two crew, maybe 1 crew, it's about the same. I mean, this was a very small area that you're packing these 10 young men into with people shooting at them. And I think that just speaks to the courage and their commitment to doing what their duty was.
Right.
And we went day after day if necessary. You know, sometimes there would be a space between flights because of weather in the continent. We had to, because we were daylight precision bombers with the Norden bomb sight, we had to see our target. So we didn't have radar in those days on our airplanes. We had one group of B-17s that did have radar, and if we thought that we might possibly have to bomb through the clouds, we would import one of those to be our lead airplane. And so then we could bomb through the clouds, but we preferred to see our target and use that Norden bomb sight.
Here's I got a question, and I got like 10 of them here for you, and I'm actually even getting them on my cell phone. But there's a question about the Norden bomb sight. Was it really that accurate, or was that propaganda?
It was, at 500 feet, we could put a practice bomb on the target time after time after time. 500 feet. Now we're at 22 or 3 or 4,000 feet. The winds between us and the ground were not the same as they were where we were. So the bombs drifted. So the way we cured that is one group would drop, the lead group, and maybe all of their bombs would drift off to the left of the target, not hit it at all. But the next group, the lead bombardier, saw where those hit, and he deliberately aimed to the right of the target, so his might drift right onto the target. Right. So there were 21 behind us, 21 behind them, and we just kept doing it until we got it right.
Is that what they mean when people talk about there was a lead bombardier and the rest are called toggaliers?
Yes.
Okay.
We carried a bombardier on my crew through the entire thing, but later on they decided, well, a gunner could do that job. And they taught him how to release the bombs, open the bomb bay doors, and do the things necessary, because the lead bombardier was what determined where the bombs were going.
Right. How many times did you return your B-17 with bombs still hung up in the bomb bay?
About twice. I brought a full load back about twice because I was told to bring them back. I didn't really like to bring them back because on my 27th mission, we got into Europe, therefore we were in the enemy territory, and we were recalled and said, come back, the whole group, turn around, come back, bring your bombs back. So here we are, still full of fuel, still full of bombs, ammo. We had a lot of stuff that we normally would get rid of, so we had a very heavy airplane to land back in England. And we got shot at, so they counted it as a mission. So
why would that doesn't seem to make sense to bring it? You come back, you burst a tire, you could.
Maybe they were running short on bombs. That may have been the reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben's telling me we got a second here, and
All right, if the colonel's willing to stay with us, we can keep going. But
right. So we got 1 more minute.
1 minute till the next break.
1 minute till the next break. Okay. All right. So I'll answer or ask a question that I think you can answer quickly. So what was the average altitude that you guys bombed from?
Between 19 and 24,000.
Right.
Those were the altitudes that we liked. I did bomb in France. I bombed the V-1 rocket sites and airfield near Paris, and we were only at 12,000. We didn't like that because the flak was more accurate at the lower level.
Sure.
So we liked it to get up there, as far as we could. I got to 26,000 one day with a heavily loaded airplane. But most of the time we were 24 below.
And below.
Yeah.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to American Warrior Radio. This is your host, Ben Buehler-Garcia. We've got John Mullison, who's also interviewing Colonel Richard Bushong, and he's got just a couple more questions. Colonel, if you can stay with us a little bit. I know this place is just loaded with fans.
Yeah, they want to see
autograph.
him.
So I tell you, when we come back, Colonel, if you'll give us just 2 more minutes so
Sure.
John can wrap up, and we'll take
Yes.
care of that. Ladies and gentlemen, visit the 390th.G for more information. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hello again. I'm Alex Wright, Executive Director of the 390th Memorial Museum in Tucson, Arizona. We are the separate B-17 museum located on the grounds of the Pima Air and Space Museum here in Tucson. Today I want to introduce you to our premier exhibit, the B-17G Flying Fortress Heavy Bomber. The B-17 was one of 2 heavy bombers the United States used in World War II to destroy Nazi Germany's ability to wage war in Europe. The U.S. Army Air Forces stationed the heavy bombers in East Anglia, England, to be close to the fight, so to speak. The B-17 was designed by Boeing and built by 3 aircraft manufacturing companies during the war: the Boeing Company, the Douglas Aircraft Company, and the Lockheed Vega Aircraft Company. In all, these companies built 12,731 B-17s by the end of World War II. The B-17 heavy bomber carried a crew of 10. 5 of the crew members were located forward of the bomb bay, and 5 crew members were stationed aft of the bomb bay. Let's examine each crew position on the airplane. The bombardier was responsible for aiming and dropping the bombs on target. The navigator was responsible for calculating the course to and from the target. The pilot and the co-pilot were responsible for flying the airplane. The flight engineer was responsible for monitoring all of the mechanical systems on the airplane. He also doubled as the top turret gunner. The radio operator was responsible for all electronic communications coming into or going out of the airplane. The ball turret gunner, the 2 waist gunners, and the tail gunner were responsible for the defense of the airplane against fighter attacks. The B-17 carried 4,000 pounds of bombs and approximately 10,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition for its 12 defensive machine guns. The aircraft was powered by 4 Curtiss-Wright R-1820 9-cylinder radial engines producing almost 5,000 horsepower. The bomber cruised at between 180 and 190 miles per hour, and most of the time it dropped its bombs from around 25,000 feet. Our B-17G is on loan from the National Museum of the United States Air Force. We have had it here in the 390th Memorial Museum since 1987, when our museum opened. It was built by the Lockheed Vega Company in Burbank, California, and it came off the assembly line in July 1945. The aircraft is named I'll Be Around, a tribute to the crew of an actual 390th Bomb Group aircraft of that same name that was lost on the June 4th, 1944 mission to Boulogne, France. I hope you have enjoyed the tour of our B-17, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for the next edition of the 390th Memorial Museum's Museum from Home. So long.
Warrior Radio, ladies and gentlemen, this is your host Ben Bueller Garcia. We're very pleased to be on the road. We're at the 390th Memorial Museum. This is just an amazing museum on the grounds of the Pima Air and Space Museum. No matter where you're hearing this broadcast around the country, I'd encourage you to set a few days aside, come here. Over 400 aircraft at the Pima Air and Space Museum. One aircraft here that we're sitting in front of, but a really special aircraft, a really special guy. John, you've got one more wrap-up question for Colonel Bushong.
Yeah,
we got him.
Yeah, he's a rock star. The attention in this place, the energy is awesome. I got a question for you, sir. Before you go, I know there's some other people who want to interview you and some TV stations, etc. But do you think people today are different than when you were a kid?
Yes, I do see a difference between the kids that were the same age I was then and what our people did. We accepted a lot of responsibility at a very young age in those days, and I don't know if our young kids could do that. I was 19 when I started pilot training. I wanted to go get in the war and eliminate somebody, the Germans or the Japs. So I wanted to do that, and I don't know today whether guys really want to do that like they did then.
Why do you think that is? Because I've heard that from a number of, your generation, that people say that people don't have the same level of responsibility or something.
Oh, I don't know what causes that difference, but I still think there is a difference between our generation and the present generation. I don't know, maybe the upbringing that we had then, hard work, do things, you want to do this, go do it,
Do you think the Depression had anything to do?
It may have, yeah. That was a serious time in our life. I talk about going in, we were all skinny, everybody.
Right.
The whole batch of us was skinny in those days. Well, that's not true today.
Right.
Yeah.
It was Alex Wright. He's the head of the museum here. He and I stopped at McDonald's, and we were talking about we can just go up and order food, but back when your generation, you knew how to hunt and prepare and bake your food.
Yep.
And today, nobody knows how to do that.
No, that's right. We had to learn.
Sir, there's a lot of people that want to talk to you, and so I'm going to have to say goodbye. But this has been just a terrific honor, and to see the number of people and the ages and the diversity of everybody here, you've got to know that your legacy is going to live on in many.
Well, thank you. And, I'm very fond of this museum. This whole thing was built by 390th veterans, so we're very proud of it. Yeah. And I contribute to it on a regular basis.
Every Thursday, I hear.
Yeah.
Sir, thank you.
Colonel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Folks, if you want to hear more of Colonel Bushong's story, you're welcome to visit AmericanWarriorRadio.com. Click on the podcast link.
Well, that's fine.
Give the Colonel time to. Do we need to pipe him out or play a song or something? Or? Hey, you can visit AmericanWarriorRadio.com, click on the podcast link, and click on the World War II tab, and you'll hear stories by Colonel Bushong and others like him. We're broadcasting from the 390th Memorial Museum. This is just a gorgeous, wonderful museum. And it's not just the physical things you can see here, but just the information. This is a personal history of the members of the 390th bomber group, and I mean, they've got archives where you can look up people who served, you can look up missions. They just opened a brand new display that is just fascinating. They've got bomber jackets that were worn by some of these crew members and their families donated to the museum, and they're absolutely fascinating. All about telling stories, right, John?
Yeah, you think so. That's how we learn. We tell stories.
I'm fascinated by your history as nutritious. It's not my first language. Nutritious statement.
I'm an ad guy. I come up with copy. I come up with headlines. I came up with that, and then it was like I was speaking somewhere, and somebody came up afterwards and told me that that was a brilliant saying. And I thought, well, it was by accident, but thinking about it, how history nourishes our mind and it gives us perspective. If I can just kind of comment, we teach STEM, and STEM is a good thing. We all want to be
science, technology, engineering,
and math. But you think about it, 2 + 2 = 4 everywhere in the universe. But it's learning history that gives us the context of how and why we would want 2 + 2 to = 4, or the story of how we learned that. So there's a depth that comes from studying history. And I also think that history teaches you how to have the basic virtues of faith and hope. Because if you can believe that learning will actually affect your outcome, that's a pretty hopeful, faithful statement.
And a key part of that, and it struck me, John, when you were talking to Colonel Bushong about this, that maybe some of the differences between his generation and current generations, you've got to have an inquisitive mind. You've got to want to ask. Mm-hmm. And the answers very often for the future are found in history if people bother to look for them. So Ben gets one damn question every show. Here it is.
Right.
So to me, it makes perfect sense that a restaurant consultant ad guy got involved in military history, but maybe that path is not as clear to some of our listeners. So
to give you my background.
How did that go? Well, you don't have to tell us a novel, John. Just, I mean,
Well,
what was, and maybe here,
I'll
because
tell
you've
you.
got 42 awards and I have none. So let me I'll prime the pump here.
Yeah.
My junior year in high school, had to write a book report, small town school. There weren't that many books in the library. I picked a book called Achtung Eagles. And it was a book about the 4th Fighter Group, the Eagle squadrons that flew in World War II. Mm-hmm. And I was hooked.
Right.
And that just started a litany of wanting to know more and getting to know, and which really led me to the fact that as a civilian, because I never served, it's my duty to support those who do. So that's why we do the show. So was there an aha moment for John like that?
There's really 2 of them. First of all, as a little kid, I think like a lot of people in history, I was taken by airplanes. My dad built model airplanes. And my mom, when I was 3 years old, would get the box of model airplanes and then put it in front of me with some crayons and a piece of paper. And she'd say, okay, look at the scene, because there were all these really cool paintings. The airplane dogfights and bullet holes and stuff. And I would draw the next scene, and then my mom would say, well, tell me the story behind it. And my dad had a box of paperbacks, a lot of the same books probably.
Could be.
And that's how I learned to read. So I became, other kids collected baseball cards, and I always wondered why there wasn't a George Petty card or a Joe Foss card.
Oh, Joe Foss is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I got to know him before he passed. So but the real aha moment came when I was in the restaurant business, and I had a number of employees, and I saw the influence that I had on them. But I was young, and I looked back, and I'd been through all the executive training stuff, and was very successful technically. Maybe from a STEM standpoint, I was successful. But I felt like I didn't know what I was doing leading people. And so just chance, luck, as Colonel Bushong would have said, I got to know Bud Anderson. He was a triple ace in World War II, and he's still with us, a great American hero. And I had a friendship with him, and I asked him a question. I said, look, let's not talk about there I was at 30,000 feet surrounded by Germans. What I really want to know is you're 21 years old, and you're surrounded by these guys, and they're trusting you to lead them into combat. Tell me how you did it, because I've got partners, and I've got employees, and I've got colleagues and vendors, and I feel like my leadership ability just isn't there. So he started coaching me, and how many people can say they had a business coach of a World War II triple ace? But he said to me, he said, John, he goes, look, you get us to record the story of our combat story, and all you need to do is tell that once. But if you want to interview other old guys, and he used the term old guys, and ask those questions about leadership, about life, about what it takes to be an American or character, whatever, I'll open up my Rolodex. And he did. So a lot of these guys on the History Channel, and I had their numbers. They called my house. We talked, and we got to know each other for years.
You know, now that Colonel Bushong is out of earshot, John, when we come back, there's a question I want to ask you that he may not find so nice, but I'm dying to ask you this as a fellow history nerd. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to AmericanWarriorRadio.com. You can hear the podcast from Colonel Bushong and over 250 others at AmericanWarriorRadio.com. Also visit one of John's websites, oldguysandtheirairplanes.com. You can find his artwork at johnmollison.com, Mollison. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Alex Wright, Executive Director of the 390th Memorial Museum, the B-17 museum located on the grounds of the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona. Welcome once again to our ongoing Museum from Home series. In this segment, I want to tell you about a very important part of the 390th Bomb Group history. This part of the 390th history took place after the cessation of hostilities in World War II, but before the signing of the surrender treaty with Nazi Germany. I'm talking about Operation Chowhound. By the time hostilities ceased on April 28, 1945, the Dutch people had been occupied by the Germans for almost 5 years. The nation had suffered terribly under the brutal hand of the Nazis. The Dutch were divided and faced a severe shortage of food and fuel supplies. The winter of 1944-1945 was extremely cold and harsh, causing a rapid depletion of what little food and fuel there was left in Holland. The Nazis had destroyed most of the dikes in the Netherlands, rendering the available agricultural lands useless due to flooding. When the spring of 1945 came, the Dutch were on the edge of starvation. On April 28, 1945, the Dutch government in exile made an urgent plea to the Allies for humanitarian food relief to prevent mass starvation in the Netherlands. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, put into place a plan to airdrop food to the Dutch people. This plan was nicknamed Operation Chowhound. The 390th Bomb Group was one of 10 8th Air Force bomb groups selected to perform this extremely dangerous mission. In addition, maintenance crews from the 390th Bomb Group developed the carry and release sling that fit in the B-17 bomb bay and carried the food supplies. On May 1st, 1945, with only a verbal truce agreement from the Germans in the Netherlands, 40 390th Bomb Group aircraft loaded with food supplies took off from Parham Field in East Anglia. All aircraft made the first successful food drop to the Dutch people.
Society on a number of projects. We call them the Old Guys in the Airplanes debriefs, and it's a combination of educational kits that we provide and live Q&A and film. But it's really intimidating sometimes to be around them because they've done the things that the average person or consider heroes. But I'll say this: they're average people. Leo Thorsness, he had the Medal of Honor. He was awarded the Medal of Honor in Vietnam, and I had the opportunity to talk with him on a number of occasions. And that's the thing about an interview: you can talk to somebody for 90 minutes, but if you get to know them over, their story becomes all the...
Going on 9 years, we've been doing American Warrior Radio, 300 interviews. The amazing amount of humility. Colonel Dick Cole, they launched early. He's flying above the 200 feet above the Pacific Ocean, one-way trip. Mm-hmm. Don't know if they're coming back. And he describes that mission like I would describe you. I'm going to run down to the grocery store. Right. Brigadier General McDivitt, who was here at this event today, Korea, huge. Vietnam, orbited the Earth. Right. And he just chats with you like, yeah, whatever, just one of the guys. So that's refreshing. And I think you're right. It does facilitate a better storytelling atmosphere, if you will.
Well, I'll get back to Leo Thorsness. I asked him, every picture I see with the Medal of Honor around your neck, it just looks like a pain in the butt to wear. You're not happy. It's
the burden.
And he explained. He said, well, first I got caught, meaning somebody wrote him up, and then the second, it becomes a mantle you have to wear. And you think about the burden that the Medal of Honor people, or anybody, DFC or any great military award, it gives you a sense of responsibility. And that sense of responsibility, I remember when I'm interviewing them. And my goal is now, I want to meet these people as people, not necessarily as heroes, because if you put them on a pedestal, then they're out of touch, they're out of reach. But if you can understand them as people, then the inspiration is far more palpable, at least for people like me, or maybe for you too. But I can tell you for me, I mean, I haven't done anything heroic. I've put me into battle, I think I'd cry and run away. But when I can look at some of these people as just normal human beings, then all of a sudden I have a touchstone. Then I go, okay, at least I know what it looks like. The normal, humble human being looks like. And then I have a touchstone. If that's making any sense?
Well, sometimes change of command season. We've got a big Air Force base in our headquarter city, and they always say, "Hey, thanks for coming out and support us." But frankly, I find it inspirational. As someone in my line of work in my day job, I interact with a lot of folks that don't exactly build your faith in the human character.
Right.
But I go out there and I see these young men and women in uniform, and it recharges my batteries and inspires me. Yeah. And I will say we all can do something.
Yeah.
You're doing it through your art, you're doing it through your films, I'm doing it through radio, but everybody hearing this message wherever they are can do something.
And I know we're running out of time, but this is important. Last summer, I got to interview Brigadier General Charles McGee, and he was a Tuskegee Airman. The power of that man's objective, reasonable courage is just cool. But General McGee expressed it like this. He said, how you treat yourself is going to be how you treat your family. And how you treat your family is going to be how you treat your neighborhood. And how you treat your neighborhood is going to be how you treat your community. And how you treat your community is how you treat your country. And so what we're all doing is we're all learning how to treat our country. And we're all learning how to get along here. Now, right now in the headlines, we can go out and find a million different headlines that say we're not getting along. Well, then I think, how are people treating themselves then? I mean, we're angry, we're self-absorbed. What are we going to get? But when I meet these distinguished people, you don't get the anger, you don't get the self-absorption. You get a sense we're all in this together to play. So, again, I can be around the guys at the DFC Society, and I can get intimidated really, really, really quickly when you hear what they've done and where they've been and where they've been and what they've seen. But then you step back and you go, wait, that's an average guy or an average woman who simply responded with good character and a sense of, as Colonel Bushong said, hard work and a sense of heart. And don't we want that for everybody in our country? I mean, you do it. I like to think I do it. So it's, we all just play a part, I guess.
Well, and hearing the Colonel speak, I could have been a fighter pilot because I'm a little dinky guy. Yeah. They wouldn't have put me
You're
in
about
bombers.
3'4".
In the morning. Yeah. But one other quick question for you, John. I mean, do you feel, well, two quick questions. Number one, the most important one, unfortunately, there's a clock that's ticking here for people like you and me, and I make every effort possible to get and find those World War II veterans and the Korean era veterans. Do you sort of feel that same pressure? And I mean, just the more, because sometimes if these stories don't get told, John, they'll be lost forever.
Yeah, that's hard to describe. And once they go, if you look at my challenge coin, I've got a phrase on there that I got from a Vietnam War pilot who was writing down his memoirs, and he asked me to review it. But it's when an old man dies, a library burns.
Wow, it's powerful.
I know, it just stops you cold. And you think about how many old men, old women that we know in our lives, and they know so much, and they've been through so much.
And so that, when I encourage that everybody can do something, one of the things you can do when you hear this broadcast, whether it's a podcast or someone else, if you know of a veteran who has not told their story yet or needs to be told, send us an email, bbg at American Warrior Radio. You can find John Mollison, johnmollison.com. Let us know, or, check with your local newspaper. There's lots of great programs where they've got high school students interviewing those veterans, but please do something and get those messages out. John, your wrap. What else can folks find at oldguyswithairplanes.com?
Well, I'd like to announce real quick another project with the DFC Society that we're just starting up here. But on August 28th, the DFCSociety.org website and our Facebook and social media is going to feature our next Old Guys in Their Airplanes production, which is going to feature Colonel Robert Certain. He was the first POW of Operation Linebacker, December 18th, 1972. And it's going to be a fantastic story about failure, success, leadership, the Vietnam War, and what we can learn from it.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Again, please visit AmericanWarriorRadio.com. Over 300 podcasts you can find there. And again, no matter where you're hearing this, go to 390th.org. There's a limited number of these prints that are signed by both John and Colonel Bushong. It's a fundraiser for the museum, and trust me, they're actually quite affordable. Check it out. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, all policies and procedures remain in place. Take care.
I'm done. Where's the Johnny?